Arjun Singh arrived in Canada, carrying more than a suitcase and a dream. Behind his calm face and careful steps was a past that refused to stay buried, even after 33 years of silence. To the world, Arjun Singh was a quiet elderly immigrant who had built a harmless life from nothing. To the system that would eventually uncover him, he was a man shaped by disappearance, altered records, and unanswered violence. This is the story of how one name, hidden in plain sight for decades, triggered a chain of discoveries that would end with deportation, shattered certainty, and a truth that time could no longer protect. For more than 33 years, the 73-year-old Indian man lived a life that attracted no attention in Canada. He arrived quietly, without ceremony, and settled into a routine that made him seem ordinary and harmless. He rented small rooms, moved when necessary, and never stayed long enough in one place to stand out. His days followed the same simple pattern, and his presence slowly faded into the background of a busy immigrant neighborhood. To those around him, he was just another elderly man trying to survive in a foreign land. He worked low-profile jobs that required little interaction and left no lasting impression. Sometimes he was seen cleaning, sometimes doing light labor, and other times helping at small local businesses. He avoided leadership roles, stayed away from political or religious groups, and never gave reasons for his isolation. Over time, people stopped noticing him entirely. His name appeared on no public lists, and his face was never remembered beyond brief encounters. What made his life so effective at hiding the truth was how carefully he controlled it. He owned very little, spoke very little, and shared nothing personal. His past remained sealed behind years of silence. There were no photographs from earlier decades, no stories of childhood, no mention of family. Even those who crossed paths with him for years realized later that they knew almost nothing about him. As the years passed, age became his greatest disguise. Wrinkles softened suspicion, and gray hair replaced curiosity with sympathy. In a country built by immigrants, no one questioned why an elderly man wanted peace and anonymity. Canada offered him exactly what he needed: time, distance, and forgetting. While seasons changed and generations grew older, the man remained steady, quietly watching the world move on, unaware that the life he had carefully constructed was resting on a fragile foundation that would one day crack without warning. The first sign of trouble appeared during a routine immigration review, a process designed to update old records that had not been examined in decades. The man was not a target, and no complaint had been filed against him. His file was selected at random, grouped with thousands of others belonging to long-term residents. At first glance, everything looked ordinary. His name, age, and country of origin matched what had been recorded years earlier. Then a minor inconsistency appeared, small enough to be ignored but strange enough to raise concern. A date listed on one document did not match the entry stamp recorded in a separate system. The difference was only a few days, yet those days did not exist in any official travel log. Investigators assumed the error came from outdated record-keeping practices common in the late 1980s. When they attempted to verify the information, another issue surfaced. The passport number linked to his application appeared under a different name in an archive database. This discovery shifted the review from routine to suspicious. Further checks revealed that portions of his immigration history were missing entirely. Pages that should have documented his arrival, sponsorship details, and early employment records were absent. Instead, there were gaps filled with handwritten notes and outdated stamps that could not be digitally confirmed. Each attempt to clarify the record only produced more uncertainty. What alarmed officials most was the pattern. The inconsistencies were not random mistakes, but carefully aligned discrepancies that suggested intentional manipulation. The file showed signs of alteration long before modern systems existed. Someone had taken the time to construct a version of the man's identity that could survive limited scrutiny. For decades, it worked perfectly. As the review deepened, the case was quietly transferred to a specialized unit. No public action was taken. The investigation slowly moved beyond Canadian borders and into records that had not been touched for decades. Archived files from India were requested, many of them incomplete, damaged, or never fully digitized. What emerged was not a clear biography, but fragments of a life that ended abruptly. The man's name appeared in regional record from the late 1980s, connected to an area marked by political tension and unrest. Shortly after that period, the trail went silent, as if he had vanished without explanation. Old identification numbers led investigators to local police logs that referenced a group of individuals questioned during a violent incident that shook the region. While no convictions followed, several names were marked as persons of interest. One of those names matched an earlier version of the identity the man had used before arriving in Canada. At the time, the case collapsed due to missing witnesses and incomplete evidence. The event faded from public memory, but the paperwork remained buried in storage. Further review revealed something more troubling. Exit records showed that the man left India just days after the incident. There was no return entry, no follow-up documentation, and no record of legal clearance connected to his departure. Travel permissions appeared rushed, approved under circumstances that were never properly explained. This sudden departure raised suspicions that had never been questioned before. The more investigators examined the timeline, the clearer the pattern became. His life in India did not slowly transition into migration. It stopped suddenly and restarted elsewhere. Entire years were unaccounted for, replaced by a clean slate in Canada. Even family connections that should have appeared in records were missing or intentionally erased. What made this discovery unsettling was not only what was found, but what could not be found. The incident tied to his past was never officially closed, only forgotten as time pushed newer crises to the surface. Records described an organized act of violence that occurred during a period when law and order were stretched thin. Properties were damaged, people were injured, and the situation escalated faster than authorities could control. In the confusion, responsibility was difficult to assign, and many involved were never identified with certainty. His name remained in the files not as an accused criminal, but as someone whose movements and associations raised concern. What complicated the case was the lack of direct evidence. No physical proof connected him to the worst moments of the incident. Statements taken at the time were inconsistent and later withdrawn. Fear, pressure, and chaos shaped the investigation, leaving behind a weak foundation that could not support formal charges. Still, intelligence notes suggested that he played a role in planning rather than execution, operating behind the scenes where visibility was low and accountability even lower. Years later, Canadian authorities struggled with how to interpret this information. The absence of a conviction meant he was not legally guilty of any crime in India. Yet the patterns uncovered during the review suggested deliberate involvement in activities that caused harm. The question was not whether he could be punished, but whether he should have ever been allowed to start a new life without scrutiny. Experts reviewing the case noted that many individuals involved in similar incidents during that era disappeared into other countries, using false or altered identities. The man's carefully constructed immigration file now seemed to follow the same blueprint. His escape was not dramatic or rushed, but methodical and patient. What made the situation even more unsettling was the contrast between past and present. In Canada, the man's life unfolded without disruption, shaped by caution and restraint. He avoided anything that might draw attention, choosing stability over ambition. His routine rarely changed, and his behavior reflected someone determined to remain unnoticed. He followed rules carefully, kept documents in order, and never challenged authority. For decades, there was no reason for officials to look twice at him. His record remained clean, reinforcing the image of a law-abiding resident. Those who observed him from a distance saw no signs of danger or aggression. He lived modestly, relied on public services only when necessary, and maintained a low profile in every sense. As he grew older, physical frailty replaced any lingering suspicion. Age reshaped public perception, turning him into someone associated with vulnerability rather than threat. The longer he stayed out of trouble, the more convincing his transformation appeared. This peaceful existence created a sharp divide in how his story was interpreted once the investigation surfaced. Some viewed his life in Canada as proof that he had changed, that whatever happened in his past no longer defined him. They argued that decades of quiet behavior carried more weight than unresolved allegations from another time and place. To them, deportation felt excessive, even cruel. Others saw his restraint differently. They believed his silence and discipline were not signs of reform, but strategies of survival. To them, the absence of crime was not innocence, but control. The idea that he could live undetected for so long only strengthened suspicions that he understood how to disappear within systems and communities. This conflict revealed a deeper issue. Justice systems are built to respond to action, not absence. His life in Canada offered no new harm to measure, only the echo of old uncertainty. The question became whether a peaceful present could outweigh a concealed past. The case reached a turning point when deportation proceedings were formally initiated. What began as an administrative concern transformed into a legal process with serious consequences. The focus shifted away from criminal guilt and toward the manner in which the man had entered and remained in the country. Authorities argued that his residency was built on misrepresentation, making his long stay legally fragile despite the passage of time. Age and duration, they claimed, could not correct a false foundation. The reality of deportation introduced a new layer of tension. At 73, removal was no longer just a legal outcome, but a life-altering event. His health records showed increasing dependence on medical support, and his social ties existed almost entirely within Canada. Returning to India meant more than relocation. It meant confronting a society that had changed beyond recognition and a past that was no longer distant. Deportation became a force that reopened wounds rather than closed cases. Human rights advocates raised concerns about fairness and proportionality. They pointed to his decades of peaceful living and questioned whether administrative punishment served justice or simply corrected an old oversight. Others argued that allowing him to remain would signal that time alone could erase deception. The system now faced a moral test alongside a legal one. Behind the scenes, officials reviewed international agreements, precedent cases, and security assessments. Each review reinforced the same conclusion. The issue was not who he was now, but how he arrived. The law offered little flexibility when deception was proven, regardless of personal transformation. As the process moved forward, the man's future narrowed to a single decision. Deportation was no longer a possibility, but a looming outcome. The country that had sheltered him for 33 years prepared to let him go, not with force or spectacle. As the case approached its final stage, a comprehensive review was ordered to ensure no detail had been overlooked. Investigators revisited every document connected to the man's arrival and long-term residency. Advanced digital tools were used to scan, restore, and compare records that were once considered unreadable or irrelevant. What had previously looked like harmless gaps now formed a clearer picture when examined together. Archived witness summaries from the original incident in India were recovered and reanalyzed. While still insufficient for criminal prosecution, they established consistent patterns in movement and association. Travel data confirmed that the man left the country immediately after the unrest, contradicting earlier claims of an unrelated departure. Border exit records, airline manifests, and visa applications aligned in a way they never had before. Each piece alone meant little, but together they removed doubt about intentional timing. The review also exposed how his Canadian identity was assembled. Early applications relied heavily on self-declared information, supported by documents that were later proven to be altered versions of legitimate records. These alterations were subtle, designed to pass manual checks common at the time. Officials concluded that the deception was not accidental or desperate, but calculated and patient. Legal analysts involved in the review acknowledged the limits of the case. No new crime could be charged within Canada, and extradition was not pursued. Still, the purpose of the review was not punishment, but clarity. The findings confirmed that his presence in the country was never lawful in the way it appeared. The final assessment left little room for appeal. Compassionate factors were documented, but outweighed by the integrity of the immigration system. Allowing the man to remain would require ignoring evidence that had now been clearly established. With the review complete, the outcome became inevitable. The decision was carried out without public attention or dramatic scenes. The process followed routine procedures, moving steadily toward an ending that had been years in the making. Paperwork was finalized, travel arrangements were approved, and notifications were issued quietly. After decades of blending into the background, the man's departure mirrored his life in Canada, unnoticed by most, yet heavy with meaning. There were no headlines at the moment it happened, only the silent conclusion of a long chapter. As he prepared to leave, the weight of time became impossible to ignore. 33 years had reshaped his identity, habits, and sense of belonging. Canada was no longer just a country he lived in. It was the only place where his adult life truly existed. Removal meant erasing that stability in a single act. What awaited him was uncertain, defined more by memory than reality. The country he left behind decades earlier had changed, and so had he. The case left lasting questions for those who examined it. It highlighted how systems can fail quietly, allowing altered histories to pass as truth. It also exposed the limits of justice when evidence arrives too late to fully act. The man was never convicted, never formally judged for the past that followed him in fragments. Instead, he faced a different kind of consequence, one rooted in administration rather than law. For authorities, the outcome reinforced the importance of scrutiny, even when time has softened appearances. For the public, it raised uncomfortable reflections about forgiveness, accountability, and identity. Can decades of peaceful living balance unresolved harm? Does a quiet life undo deception or merely conceal it? The story ended not with certainty, but with unresolved echoes. A man left a country that once offered refuge, carrying a past that was never fully confronted. The files were closed, the system corrected itself, and life moved on.